Captain Evelyn Carter, a brave Air Force officer, is wrongly stopped at the airport by a rude TSA officer. But later, she discovers a big secret. A powerful CIA leader is behind it. With courage and honesty, Evelyn exposes the truth, clears her name, and helps bring justice and big changes across the country. Before we begin, hit subscribe to Black Battles, where every story hits harder than truth itself. The hum of Atlanta International Airport filled the air. The steady rhythm of rolling suitcases, distant flight announcements, and the occasional echo of laughter. Beneath the glass ceiling of Terminal C, sunlight poured through like liquid gold, touching hundreds of faces moving in different directions. But among the noise, one woman stood out, Captain Evelyn Carter, U.S. Army Intelligence, retired but never detached from duty. Her presence was quiet, yet commanding, like a soldier still in formation, long after the parade had ended. Her dark blue blazer was neatly pressed, her hair tied back in a simple knot, and on her wrist was a steel handcuff, one end looped around her wrist, the other securing a black briefcase stamped with a faint government seal. Inside that case were classified reports meant for the Pentagon, documents that could prevent a crisis halfway across the world. Evelyn moved with precision, her steps calculated and steady. The long years of military discipline hadn't left her. They were stitched into her every breath. But as she reached the security checkpoint at Gate 47, she noticed the familiar signs of impatience ahead. A long line of travelers, overworked TSA agents, and the ever-growing tension that came with modern air travel. Her eyes scanned the checkpoint calmly. She was early, as always. She believed in being prepared, even for ordinary things like airport security. But she didn't know that today's checkpoint would become a battlefield of a different kind. Behind the conveyor belt, Officer Bradley Knox adjusted his badge and rubbed his tired eyes. He was in his late 40s, his once fit frame softened by years of bitterness and caffeine. The job had worn him down, or maybe it had only exposed what was already inside him. Bradley had a reputation around the airport, overly aggressive, easily provoked, and especially harsh toward passengers he found suspicious. When his eyes landed on Evelyn, something in him hardened. A flicker of disdain crossed his face, the kind that comes not from duty, but from prejudice disguised as authority. He watched her approach, her confident posture, her uniform pin glinting under the terminal lights, and immediately felt the sting of resentment. She carried herself like someone who belonged everywhere, and Bradley hated people like that. "Next," he barked, motioning her forward. Evelyn stepped up to the scanner, offering her ID and travel documents. Her tone was calm, professional, the same tone she'd used in countless briefings across military bases. "Good morning, officer." Bradley glanced at her ID, then back at her face. "Captain Carter, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Army Intelligence?" "Yes, sir," Evelyn replied politely. "Traveling to D.C. on official business." He squinted at her ID again, then at the handcuffed briefcase. "What's in there?" "Classified documents. I have clearance to transport them," she said, pulling out a folded authorization letter from her folder. Bradley didn't even glance at it. Instead, he gave a humorless chuckle. "You know, I've seen all kinds of fake papers in my time. Folks think they can flash a badge or wear a fancy suit and get through faster." Evelyn's jaw tightened slightly. "These documents are legitimate. You can verify them through federal channels." But Bradley wasn't listening. He motioned for another officer to step back, asserting dominance. He leaned closer to her briefcase and muttered, "You people always think the rules don't apply, don't you?" The words cut through the noise around them, quiet enough not to be heard by everyone, but loud enough to pierce Evelyn's composure. For a brief second, her eyes flickered with disbelief. Then, like a soldier regaining formation, she steadied herself. "I'm following every rule you've set, officer," she said softly. "You're welcome to confirm anything you need." But the tension had already begun to ripple outward. A few passengers noticed the sharp tone in Bradley's voice. A child holding his mother's hand watched silently as Evelyn's briefcase was seized and slammed onto the metal table. The clang echoed across the terminal, drawing more eyes. Evelyn stood perfectly still. Years of training told her not to react. The air seemed to thicken as Bradley opened the case, ignoring her protest, scattering folders across the table, and then the floor. Pages fluttered like broken wings stamped with red letters. Top secret, classified, eyes only. Gasps rose from the line. A young man took out his phone. Bradley sneered. "Looks like we've got ourselves a real patriot here," he said sarcastically. "Carrying fake intel through security." Evelyn bent down slowly, gathering her papers, her hand trembling just enough to betray the storm beneath her calm surface. She wanted to speak, to correct him, to defend herself, but every instinct told her to stay composed. A single misstep, a raised voice, and she knew how quickly control could be turned against her. The terminal, once full of motion and chatter, had gone silent. All that could be heard was the faint hum of the conveyor belt and the soft sound of paper being gathered from the floor. As Evelyn rose to her feet, holding her scattered documents close, she looked at Bradley, not with anger, but with a quiet, devastating disappointment, and in that silent exchange, something unspoken passed between them. A warning, a reckoning, and the faint spark of a storm that was only beginning to unfold at Gate 47. Evelyn Carter stood in silence as the last of her documents were gathered from the floor. The crowd that had once moved past without noticing now lingered, drawn by the uneasy stillness that hung in the air. Bradley Knox stood across from her, his jaw tight, his chest puffed out like a man trying to prove something to himself more than anyone else. He spoke again, his tone sharp. "Step aside, ma'am. We're going to do a full search." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "You've already searched my belongings, officer. Everything is in order." Bradley's lips curled into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Not until I say it is." He turned to the security cameras above. "We've got a suspicious passenger at checkpoint 3. Possible document fraud." His voice was deliberate, loud enough for everyone in line to hear. Whispers rippled through the terminal. "Suspicious? Fraud?" Passengers exchanged glances. Some frowned at Bradley's tone. Others just watched, their phones slowly rising to record. Evelyn's instinct told her to de-escalate, to keep control of her tone and posture. "Officer Knox, I've cooperated fully," she said, her voice even. "Those papers contain information vital to national security. Mishandling them could have serious consequences." But Bradley wasn't listening. He wanted a reaction, something to justify his growing hostility. "You think your fancy words scare me?" he scoffed. "You people always hide behind your titles and uniforms. Not today." Her pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. The training that had carried her through war zones now held her still in an airport terminal. She knew the moment she raised her voice, she'd lose control of the narrative. And men like Bradley thrived on that loss. Bradley gestured to another TSA agent, a younger officer named Lisa Monroe, to take over the scanner. "Pat her down," he ordered. Lisa hesitated. She had seen enough to feel uneasy. "Sir, she's already cleared the scanner." "I said pat her down," he barked, slamming his palm against the table. The sudden noise startled several nearby passengers. Evelyn took a small breath and extended her arms. "Go ahead, Officer Monroe," she said quietly. Lisa's movements were gentle but tense. She could feel Evelyn trembling slightly beneath the surface, not from fear, but from the weight of humiliation. When she finished, she gave Bradley a quick nod. "Nothing suspicious." Bradley's eyes narrowed. He wasn't looking for contraband. He was looking for control. "Open the case again," he demanded. Evelyn met his gaze. "You've already done that twice." "I said open it." The sharpness of his voice made a child nearby cry. A mother pulled her son close, whispering something about not staring. The tension in the air was heavy enough to taste. Evelyn sighed softly, placing the briefcase on the table again. "You're making a mistake," she said. "I'm carrying documents cleared under Federal Directive 9A. Verify them before you proceed." But Bradley only sneered. "Don't tell me how to do my job, Captain." The title rolled off his tongue like an insult. Then, with unnecessary force, he shoved the case open again. Papers rustled. A pen rolled to the edge of the table and clattered onto the floor. Evelyn's knuckles whitened as she fought to stay composed. Passengers nearby began to whisper louder now, some taking sides, others simply filming. A man in a business suit stepped forward. "Excuse me, officer. She hasn't done anything wrong." "You're making a scene," Bradley spun around. "You want to be next, sir?" His voice cracked slightly, his anger barely covering his growing insecurity. Evelyn looked at the man and gave a small nod, a silent plea for him to step back. She didn't need another person caught in the crossfire of Bradley's rage. Then came the shove. As Evelyn reached for one of the fallen folders, Bradley's hand hit her shoulder, pushing her backwards into the metal detector. The sound rang out, a dull metallic thud, followed by a collective gasp from the crowd. "Hey!" someone shouted. "You can't do that!" Phones lifted higher. Every movement, every word was now being recorded. Evelyn steadied herself, blinking hard. The humiliation burned, but she refused to give him what he wanted. Fear. She looked him in the eyes, her voice calm and cutting. "You've crossed a line, officer." Bradley's face flushed red. "I'll decide where the line is." He radioed again, voice trembling now. "Backup needed at checkpoint 3. Subject is non-compliant. The word hit Evelyn like a curse. She'd spent 2 decades serving her country, defending its principles, and now she was being branded a threat in her own nation's airport. Within moments, 2 more TSA agents arrived, confused as they saw the scene. Papers scattered, passengers whispering, cameras rolling. One of them, Officer Raymond Lee, frowned at Bradley. "What's going on here?" Bradley straightened his shoulders. "This woman's carrying falsified military credentials." Evelyn spoke before he could continue. "My credentials are authentic. My clearance can be verified through the Department of Defense. Please, check the database before this gets worse." Raymond hesitated. "Brad, maybe we should—" "I said she's not cleared." Bradley snapped, his voice cracking with desperation. The crowd had grown restless. Someone called out, "She said she's military. Check her ID!" Others muttered about racism, abuse, and power. The air felt ready to explode, and in that chaos, with the hum of the terminal now drowned out by murmurs and recording phones, Evelyn Carter stood tall. Her silence spoke louder than any argument. She knew something Bradley Knox didn't yet understand. Every second he kept this going, every shove, every insult, every word, was becoming evidence. And before the day was over, the truth would turn against him. The air inside the terminal had changed. It was no longer the casual hum of travel. It was charged, heavy, alive with unease. The once orderly security line now looked more like a crowd circling a storm. Phones were raised, eyes were wide, and whispers grew into full conversations. Is she military? Did he just push her? Someone needs to stop this guy. Evelyn Carter stood in the center of it all, calm, composed, but burning inside. Her pulse beat against her collarbone like a war drum she couldn't silence. Her years in Army intelligence had trained her for many things: interrogation rooms, field briefings, and quiet missions that never made the news. But nothing had prepared her for the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in her own country, in full view of civilians she'd spent her life protecting. Across from her, Officer Bradley Knox paced like a man cornered by his own mistakes. His voice grew louder, more defensive, almost desperate. "You don't know who she is," he barked at the crowd. "You don't know what she's carrying." A young man filming from the line muttered, "Yeah, and you don't know what you're doing." Laughter rippled through the passengers. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Bradley's face flush. He could feel control slipping through his fingers like sand. He had to reassert it, had to prove to everyone that he was in charge here. He turned back to Evelyn, his eyes cold. "Step away from the table." Evelyn's voice was low but firm. "Officer Knox, I am on official assignment. You're obstructing a federal operation. You need to stand down." Her calm tone only enraged him more. He slammed his hand onto the table so hard the metal trembled. "Don't tell me what I need to do." A TSA agent beside him flinched. "Brad, maybe we should verify her." "I said stay out of it." Bradley's voice echoed, sharp and raw. People stopped moving altogether now. Even the children who'd been fidgeting moments earlier stood frozen, sensing that something was deeply wrong. Evelyn took a slow breath. "Sir, I'm warning you. You're about to violate multiple federal statutes," Bradley sneered. "Big words. But you're not above the law, sweetheart." The word hit like a slap. Sweetheart, that's what he chose, in front of everyone. The murmurs around them shifted into disgust. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but her expression didn't change. Her silence, the kind that only comes from immense restraint, spoke louder than anything she could have said. At that moment, a voice broke through the tension. "Hey man, she's done nothing wrong," shouted a passenger. Bradley whirled around. "Mind your business." But the dam had already cracked. Dozens of passengers were filming, shouting, demanding answers. "Why are you treating her like that?" "She showed you ID." "We saw you shove her." Evelyn stood still, her documents once again gathered neatly in her arms. She looked like a statue of composure, calm in the middle of chaos. Every instinct told her to fight back, but she knew better. She'd seen men like Bradley Knox before, the kind who mistook power for purpose. And she knew how their stories ended. Bradley reached for his radio again, his voice trembling now, the false authority beginning to crumble. "This is Officer Knox. I need full backup. Possible threat at checkpoint 3. Threat," Evelyn repeated softly, disbelief in her tone. "I am a United States Army officer, not a threat." But Bradley ignored her. His words spilt out faster, sharper, desperate to rewrite the narrative before anyone else could. "She's non-compliant. She's concealing classified material. Those are official military briefings," Evelyn said firmly, her patience wearing thin. "And you're violating federal protocol by mishandling them. Put your hands where I can see them," he shouted suddenly. The crowd gasped. Evelyn raised her hands slowly, her voice still calm. "Officer Knox, you're escalating a situation that doesn't exist." Bradley moved closer, his face inches from hers now. The smell of stale coffee clung to his breath. "I decide what exists here," he hissed. "And I say you're done." He reached for the briefcase again, but this time Evelyn stepped back, her voice suddenly steel. "Touch that case again, and you'll be explaining yourself to the Pentagon by morning." Something in her tone, not loud, not angry, but heavy with command, made him pause. The same tone she had once used to direct soldiers under fire. For a moment he hesitated, and in that heartbeat everyone around them saw it, the shift in power. The younger TSA agents looked at each other, unsure of what to do. One whispered, "Brad, you need to stop. This isn't right." But Bradley couldn't. He was too far gone, trapped in the lie he'd built, the authority he was now abusing just to save face. "She's dangerous," he said, voice cracking. She's lying." A man's voice from the crowd rang out. "We're recording everything." The final thread of control snapped. Bradley spun toward the crowd, shouting, "Turn those off, all of you." But no one did. The airport had turned into a courtroom, and the jury was everyone watching. Evelyn lowered her hands slowly, her gaze steady, unbroken. "You've made your choice, Officer Knox," she said softly. "Now live with it." And as those words hung in the air, the distant sound of approaching footsteps, firm, authoritative, and in sync, echoed through the terminal. Security reinforcements, federal agents. The balance of power was about to shift, and Bradley Knox had no idea that his downfall had already begun. For a few long seconds, the airport stood frozen in silence, the kind of silence that exists just before a storm breaks. The echo of Officer Knox's shouting still hung in the air, clashing with the calm that surrounded Captain Evelyn Carter. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't fight. Her stillness said more than any protest ever could. But the passengers around her weren't still anymore. The quiet hum of travel had turned into a low murmur, angry, restless, growing louder by the minute. She didn't do anything wrong. Why's he yelling like that? She's clearly military. Look at her badge. Dozens of eyes turned toward Bradley Knox, their gazes sharp and condemning. He could feel them on his back, the weight of judgment, of disbelief. His breathing grew heavier. The control he had gripped so tightly just moments ago was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. Evelyn slowly lowered her hands. The chain of the handcuffed briefcase clinked softly, the only sound cutting through the tension. Her voice, steady but low, carried through the noise. "Officer Knox, I am not your enemy. I am a United States officer performing my duty." But Bradley's pride was louder than reason. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he barked. His voice trembled this time, not from anger but from fear. He was losing control, and everyone could see it. Behind him, Officer Raymond Lee, the younger TSA agent who'd arrived as backup, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, maybe we should step aside and verify her ID through Washington." Bradley cut him off. No, we do things my way here. The crowd gasped at his outburst. Even his fellow agents exchanged uneasy looks. Evelyn simply stood there, her eyes locked on him, not with hatred but with quiet pity. She'd seen this before, in war zones and command rooms alike. Men who mistook fear for authority, who couldn't tell the difference between power and integrity. A woman near the front of the line called out, "She's right. You can't talk to her like that." Bradley turned toward the voice, shouting, "Ma'am, stay back." But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. Phones rose higher. Someone began live streaming. The incident, once confined to Gate 47, was now spreading across the internet in real time. Hashtags appeared on screens within minutes. Jar Justice at Gate 47, Evelyn Carter. Airport racism. Evelyn didn't see it, but she could feel it. The energy shift. The moment when silence turned into solidarity. A teenage boy stepped forward slightly, filming. "Ma'am, we've got you on camera," he said, his voice trembling but earnest. "He can't hurt you now." Evelyn's expression softened. "Thank you," she said quietly. Bradley's hand twitched. He wanted to snatch the phone, to shut it all down, but something, maybe the dozens of eyes on him, kept him frozen in place. His partner, Officer Monroe, whispered urgently, "Brad, please stop. Everyone's recording. You're making it worse, but Knox was too far gone." "No," he hissed. "I'll show them what happens when someone disrespects federal authority." He reached toward Evelyn again, but this time Raymond Lee stepped between them. The younger officer's voice was firm but respectful. "That's enough, sir." Bradley blinked in disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Raymond said, straightening his posture. "She's identified herself properly. She's calm. You're the one escalating this." A ripple of agreement spread through the watching crowd. Someone clapped once. Another person joined in. Then another. It wasn't applause, not yet, but it was a sign. The people had chosen their side. Bradley's eyes darted between Evelyn, the officers, and the crowd. His authority was collapsing in real time. The fear inside him, the fear of being wrong, of being exposed, began to twist into something uglier. "You're all making a mistake," he muttered, voice shaking. "You don't know who she really is." Evelyn met his eyes. "And you don't know who you've become," she said softly. The words cut deeper than she intended. For a brief moment his face changed, not angry, not hateful, just lost. But pride wouldn't let him stop. He turned toward the intercom. "I need security and airport police at Gate 47 immediately." Evelyn exhaled quietly. She'd tried reasoning. She'd tried restraint. Now all she could do was wait for the truth to catch up with him. As the minutes passed, the crowd's voices grew louder, more unified. Someone shouted, "Hang in there, Captain!" Another yelled, "We're with you!" Even passengers in nearby gates began drifting closer, curious about the commotion. The terminal's giant glass walls reflected a sea of faces, all watching one man unravel his own career in real time. Bradley's colleagues had stopped defending him. Officer Monroe crossed her arms, shaking her head. "You just ruined yourself," she muttered under her breath. Bradley ignored her. He stood rigid, eyes darting toward the main corridor where uniformed airport police were approaching fast. Evelyn looked at them too, but she wasn't afraid. There was a quiet certainty in her posture now, the same composure she'd shown in military briefings, in tense negotiations, in combat zones where one wrong move could start a war. As the police officers neared, the crowd's chatter swelled. Dozens of phones followed their every step. Evelyn straightened her shoulders and stood tall, her documents held close to her chest. And when the officers stopped in front of her, their expressions changed. They recognized her, not from television or fame, but from respect. "Captain Carter?" one asked carefully. The crowd fell silent again. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, officer." And in that quiet moment, before anyone else could speak, the truth began to surface. And the crowd at Gate 47 knew exactly who the real threat had been all along. The airport police stood motionless for a heartbeat, the chaos around them fading into a low hum of whispers. The taller officer, Sergeant Luis Vega, studied the scene with practiced eyes. He saw the trembling hands of Officer Knox, the calm poise of Captain Carter, and the crowd that had become an unspoken jury. "Captain Carter," Vega said respectfully, stepping forward. "Ma'am, we received a report of a federal disturbance at this gate. Are you all right?" The use of her title sliced through the air like a blade. Bradley Knox froze. "Captain?" he echoed, his voice cracking. What do you mean, Captain?" Vega's partner, Officer Dana Mills, moved beside him. "Yes, sir," she said to Knox, her tone cool. "Captain Evelyn Carter, U.S. Air Force Intelligence Division. Verified through federal credentials 5 minutes ago." The crowd erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even applause. Dozens of cameras caught Knox's face as the color drained from it. Evelyn stood quietly, her calm finally returning. "I tried to tell you," she said softly, not with bitterness, but with weary truth. "But you weren't listening." Bradley's lips parted, but no words came out. His mind was a blur, the shouting, the crowd, the eyes, all of it closing in. I didn't know," he stammered. "You could have shown." "I did," Evelyn interrupted, still composed. "You tore up my clearance papers before looking at them." Gasps rippled again. Even his own team stared at him now, not as a leader, but as a liability. Sergeant Vega turned toward Knox. "Officer, is that true?" Knox swallowed hard. It was a chaotic moment, sir, and—" "Chaotic?" Vega's voice cut through him. "You handcuffed a federal officer, raised your weapon, and detained her in front of witnesses, without cause." He gestured toward the cameras. "You understand the magnitude of what you've done?" Knox looked around desperately. His authority, his shield, had become meaningless. "This isn't fair," he whispered. "She was acting suspicious. Evelyn's gaze met his. "Suspicious," she repeated quietly. "That's what you called me the moment you saw my face." The words struck like lightning. No one spoke. Even the air seemed heavier now. Behind her, Raymond Lee shifted uncomfortably. "She's right," he said, voice trembling. "You didn't even ask for ID before yelling at her. You just assumed—" "Enough," Knox snapped. But the command landed flat, empty of power. Sergeant Vega turned to Evelyn. "Captain, I assure you this will be handled properly. Do you wish to press charges for misconduct or unlawful detainment?" Evelyn hesitated. Every instinct in her body told her to say yes, to let justice run its course. But as she looked at Knox, she saw not a monster, but a man unraveling in front of his peers. Pride had driven him here, not evil, and destroying him wouldn't fix what was already broken. "No," she said finally, her voice calm. "I don't want to press charges, but I do want an apology. Not to me, but to everyone who watched this happen and thought this was normal." The crowd fell silent. Even the officers paused. Bradley looked down. His hands shook. Every ounce of defiance had drained away. He turned toward the crowd, the strangers who had filmed his downfall, and for the first time in years his voice broke. I'm sorry," he said, his words raw and cracked. "To all of you. I lost control, I didn't listen, and I let my judgment get poisoned. No one clapped, no one booed." The apology hung in the air, heavy and honest. Evelyn nodded slightly, then stepped closer to him, not as an enemy, but as someone who understood what pride could do to a person. "The hardest part of leadership," she said softly, "is admitting when you've stopped leading." Vega exhaled and looked to his team. "Escort Officer Knox to administration for debriefing," he ordered quietly, "and clear this gate. We're done here." As Knox was led away, the crowd began to disperse, still murmuring. Some people patted Evelyn's shoulder as they passed. Others whispered thank yous. For many of them, this wasn't just an airport incident. It was something larger. A small victory in a world where truth is rarely shouted louder than authority. Evelyn turned toward the large glass windows overlooking the runway. A plane lifted into the gray sky, sunlight glinting off its wings. She let out a long, slow breath. Officer Raymond Lee approached her hesitant. "Ma'am," he said. For what it's worth, I'm sorry too. I should have spoken sooner. She gave him a small smile. You spoke when it mattered, she replied. That's what counts. As the last of the crowd thinned out, Sergeant Vega approached one final time. Captain, Washington's been informed. They're sending transport for you immediately. You'll be debriefed at Langley tonight. Evelyn nodded. Understood. He looked at her with quiet admiration. You handled that better than most would have. She allowed herself a faint, tired smile. I've seen worse storms, she said, glancing toward the gate sign, Gate 47, still flickering faintly above. But every storm leaves a lesson. As she walked away, the crowd's whispers faded behind her. The terminal returned to its usual rhythm. Footsteps, boarding calls, laughter, and the echo of a truth that had finally found its voice. The truth had unfolded, and the world, even for a moment, had listened. The black SUV glided through the rain-slicked streets of Washington, D.C., headlights slicing the mist like quiet knives. Inside, Captain Evelyn Carter sat in silence, her reflection shimmering faintly in the tinted window. The city passed by, government buildings, memorial lights, the silent weight of power. But her mind was still trapped in that airport terminal. The look on Officer Knox's face, the crowd, the humiliation, the apology. Even in victory, she felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Captain Carter, said the man beside her, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, crisp, the tone of a man used to classified briefings and quiet authority. Agent Thomas Gray, CIA liaison, looked down at a small folder resting on his lap. Langley's director wants a full debrief. They've reviewed the footage from the airport. You've caused quite a stir. Evelyn's gaze didn't move from the window. I didn't cause it, she said softly. It was already there. I just refused to hide it. Gray smiled faintly. That's exactly why they want to talk to you. The SUV turned down a long, private road, vanishing into the dense trees that guarded the CIA headquarters. Within minutes, they were through. 2 layers of security, and into the cold heart of Langley. Marble floors, silent corridors, and eyes that watched everything. Evelyn followed Gray down a narrow hallway lined with surveillance monitors. Each screen showed fragments of airports, borders, embassies, the quiet machinery of intelligence at work. They stopped before a heavy steel door. Gray pressed his badge to the scanner, and it opened with a hiss. Inside, a small group waited. Director Helen Rourke, a woman in her 60s with sharp gray eyes and the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. 2 aides stood nearby, along with a federal investigator Evelyn didn't recognize. Captain Carter, Rourke began, her voice even but serious. You've had quite a day, Evelyn nodded. Yes, ma'am. Wasn't supposed to go public. No, Rourke said, folding her hands. But sometimes fate prefers to work through chaos. She gestured toward the screen on the wall. It showed still images from the airport. Evelyn surrounded by cameras, Knox shouting. The moment she was recognized by police. The footage has already reached every major network, Rourke said. Congress is calling it a civil rights flashpoint. The Pentagon calls it a security breach. And the public? She paused, a trace of admiration in her voice. They call you a hero. Evelyn shook her head. Heroes don't go viral, ma'am. They just do what they're trained to do, Gray smirked. Still, you managed to expose a national issue and protect your documents under pressure. Not many could have done that, the investigator stepped forward. Speaking of those documents, he said, setting a file on the table. We reviewed them. They're concerned about something called Operation Halcyon. Care to explain? Evelyn's spine straightened. The room seemed to tighten around her. Halcyon, she said carefully, is an ongoing counterintelligence operation tracking a potential infiltration within U.S. defense contracts. It involves unauthorized data leaks, foreign manipulation of airport security systems, and classified personnel information. Rourke's eyes narrowed. So those files Knox tried to confiscate contained evidence linking a domestic contractor to international espionage, Evelyn finished. If they'd been lost or tampered with, the breach could have reached federal levels within days. A silence settled. Even Gray looked uneasy now. So, Rourke said slowly, You were en route to brief the Pentagon on a potential infiltration inside U.S. infrastructure, and you were assaulted by a federal security agent on your way there. Yes, ma'am, Evelyn said quietly. And that's what terrifies me, because that wasn't random. The timing, the aggression, it felt orchestrated. Gray frowned. You think Knox was manipulated? Evelyn nodded slightly. Maybe not knowingly, but someone wanted me to bet Adelaide, someone who knew exactly what I was carrying. Rourke exchanged a look with her aides, then turned back. We'll open a covert review immediately. You'll stay on base until we secure the remaining Halcyon data. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Understood, ma'am. As the briefing ended, she stepped outside into the quiet Langley courtyard. The rain had stopped, but the ground still glistened under dim security lights. Somewhere in the distance, a thunderstorm grumbled, faint but steady, like a warning that hadn't yet passed. Gray joined her, hands in his coat pockets. You handled yourself well in there, he said. I handled the truth, she replied softly. That's all I had left. Gray studied her for a moment. You really think someone inside wanted to stop you? Evelyn turned to face him. Her eyes were calm but unyielding. I don't think, she said. I know. Someone tried to make sure I never reached that plane. Gray's expression hardened. Then I guess your fight's just beginning. Evelyn looked up at the night sky, a single plane streaking faintly through the darkness. It began the moment I refused to stay silent, she said. Now it's time to find out who gave the order. The corridors of Langley were unusually quiet that night. Even the hum of the ventilation seemed hesitant, as if the walls themselves were listening. Captain Evelyn Carter walked down the narrow hallway, her boots echoing softly against the polished floors. She had been summoned for a final briefing, or at least, that's what the message said. But something in the pit of her stomach told her this wasn't just another meeting. She clutched the small, encrypted drive that had survived the airport chaos. The last piece of Operation Halcyon. Dozens of names, bank transactions, and encrypted messages, all pointing to one chilling reality. The infiltration of America's own defense contracts by foreign agents. And worse, one of them was working inside Langley. When she entered the dimly lit conference room, Agent Thomas Gray was already there, pacing. He looked more tired than before, the sharpness in his posture dulled by worry. On the table lay 2 steaming cups of coffee, untouched. You're late, he said quietly, though there was no anger in his voice. Security check took longer, Evelyn replied, setting her briefcase down. They've increased clearance levels, Gray nodded. They should have done that years ago. A long silence passed between them. Rain began to fall again, tapping gently on the tall glass window behind him. Evelyn could see her reflection there, poised but strained, a soldier standing on the edge of something larger than war. She spoke first. You've seen the files? He nodded. Yes, and I wish I hadn't. Whoever orchestrated this isn't just leaking data. They're manipulating federal protocol, even TSA directives. Her pulse quickened. TSA directives? You mean? Yes, Gray interrupted. The way Officer Knox intercepted you wasn't random. He got an anonymous directive, supposedly from Homeland Command, instructing him to detain a possible suspect carrying falsified clearance documents. Evelyn froze. Someone used him. Gray met her eyes. Exactly. They fed him just enough to ignite his prejudice and make it look like a simple case of misconduct. She sank into a chair, shock settling in like cold fog. Then it wasn't about race. Not fully. It was about control. Control and timing, Gray said grimly. They needed you delayed long enough for the data in your clearance drive to expire. If you hadn't been filmed, if the incident hadn't gone viral, that evidence would have been buried in bureaucracy. Evelyn's hands tightened into fists. So who gave the order? Gray hesitated. That's the part you're not going to like. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin folder. Across the top, in stark black letters, read, Operation Halcyon. Primary contact, Director Helen Rourke. For a moment, Evelyn couldn't breathe. That's impossible, she whispered. She's the one who approved the investigation. Gray nodded grimly. And she's been the one controlling its access since day one. We think she's been feeding information to a private contractor, someone tied to international defense funding. Every leak you've been chasing leads right back to her office. Evelyn stood up, disbelief and anger flooding through her veins. You're saying my superior, the director of intelligence, orchestrated the entire confrontation at the airport? Gray's eyes flicked toward the hallway door. Not personally, but she gave clearance to send a fake directive. And she's had her fingerprints wiped from the database. That's why I called you here. We can't trust anyone else. The rain outside grew heavier, thunder rumbling in the distance. Evelyn took a step toward the door. Then we expose her, Gray exhaled slowly. You don't understand. The moment we act, we become targets. Rourke's built a network inside this building. Surveillance teams, off-book funding accounts. If she senses a breach, she'll erase everything, Evelyn finished. Including us. Their eyes met. A silent understanding between soldiers who'd both seen what power could do to people. Finally, Evelyn said, then we do it the way truth always survives, in daylight. The next morning, Langley woke to chaos. A full data leak hit every secure network simultaneously, sent from an encrypted CIA node known only to two people, Evelyn Carter and Thomas Gray. The files contained every detail of Operation Halcyon, including proof of Rourke's covert dealings with defense contractors and her manipulation of internal directives. Within an hour, federal marshals stormed the building. Rourke was taken into custody before noon. When they asked Evelyn how she'd pulled it off, she simply said, by trusting the only weapon I had left, the truth. Weeks later, the nation buzzed with headlines. CIA scandal exposes security corruption. Hero captain exonerated. New reforms underway following airport incident. Congress passed the Carter Integrity Act, mandating independent oversight of all intelligence operations and strict accountability for interagency orders. Evelyn's confrontation, once seen as chaos, became the spark for sweeping change. Bradley Knox, now dismissed from TSA, reached out through an open letter, publicly thanking her. You showed me what accountability really means, he wrote, and I'll carry that lesson for the rest of my life. But for Evelyn, the victory didn't feel like a triumph. Late one evening, she stood by the Potomac River, the lights of the Capitol shimmering on the water. The city was quiet, the world seemingly calm. Yet beneath that calm, she knew the truth. Corruption never truly disappeared. It just changed faces. Agent Gray joined her, standing a few feet away. You could have taken a higher post, he said quietly. After all this, the department would have given you anything. Evelyn smiled faintly. Titles fade. Purpose doesn't. Gray looked at her curiously. And what's your purpose now? She turned toward the water, eyes reflecting the distant monuments. To remind people that silence doesn't protect justice, she said. It buries it. A faint breeze stirred her hair as she looked up toward the stars. Somewhere above, planes traced thin white lines across the night. Ordinary travelers, safe and unaware, crossing skies that she had helped keep honest. For Evelyn Carter, the war had never been about enemies or borders. It had always been about truth, fragile, inconvenient, and necessary. And now, after everything, that truth finally had a voice.